The smell hit me before I even turned my head. Rich, heavy, meat cooking in fat, real meat. I had not smelled anything like that in 2 years. 2 years of watery soup, 2 years of turnip peel broth, 2 years of watching men shrink until their eyes looked too big for their skulls. And here, 50 feet from the wire where we slept in the dirt, someone was eating steak. My name is James Walker. I was a sergeant in the 3rd Army under General George S. Patton, and what I am about to tell you is the truest thing I have ever put into words, a story I carried inside me for 50 years before I finally decided the world needed to hear it. It was April 1945, Bavaria, Germany. The war was collapsing from every direction. The Reich, that monster empire that had swallowed half of Europe, was dying. You could feel it in the air. Not hope exactly, but something close to it. A loosening. Like a fist that had been clenched around your throat for years was finally, slowly beginning to open. But the men behind the wire at Stalag 7A did not know that yet. Not really, not in their bones. They were too far gone to feel hope. They were only feeling hunger. I was part of the advance unit that had entered the camp 2 days before General Patton arrived. We had secured the perimeter, disarmed the guards, started processing prisoners. But there was still so much chaos. The German guards had been told to stand down, not to leave. The American POWs were still in their section of the compound, waiting for food, for medical care, for word that this nightmare was actually over. The processing was slow. Too slow. We were trying to organize rations, trying to figure out who needed immediate medical attention, trying to do 10 things at once with half the men we needed. And in the meantime, the German guards were still eating from their own supplies. I knew it. It turned my stomach. But I was a sergeant. I followed orders. I did my job and I told myself the officers would sort it out. Then General Patton arrived. I was near the main gate when his convoy came through. 3 vehicles, dust still on the hoods from the road. He stepped out, and you knew immediately who he was, not just from the 4 stars on his helmet, not just from the uniform, but from the way he moved, like a man who expected the world to rearrange itself around his intentions. He was walking with Major Frank Collins, who had been coordinating the liberation. I fell in a few paces behind them as they moved through the compound, as I sometimes did when senior officers were inspecting. It was my job to be available, to carry messages, to make sure things ran smoothly. Patton was asking questions. His voice was low, controlled, but with a current under it, like a river that looked calm on the surface, but was moving fast beneath. "How many American prisoners, Major?" "Roughly 1,500, sir. Most in poor condition, malnourished. Some are sick." "How long have they been here?" "Some as long as 2 years, sir. Captured in North Africa, Italy, some in France. They were moved here as Germany started consolidating camps." Patton nodded, said nothing, kept walking. Then we passed the guard barracks. The windows were open. It was an April evening, cool but not cold, and the smell came rolling out like something from another world. Butter, fried meat, coffee, real coffee, not the burned grain substitute they had been feeding prisoners. Patton stopped walking. He stopped so suddenly that Major Collins took 2 more steps before he realized it. I stopped immediately. I had been watching Patton's face. He turned toward the window, slowly, deliberately. He looked inside. I looked too. 8 German guards, former guards, disarmed, standing down, were sitting at a long wooden table. On that table, thick cuts of beef, fried in a pan, a bowl of potatoes, golden brown, a loaf of bread with a knife stuck in it and a slab of butter beside it, tin cups of steaming coffee. They were laughing about something. One of them slapped the table. Another shook his head, grinning. They looked comfortable, relaxed, like men who had just clocked out from a difficult job and were enjoying a well-earned meal. Patton said nothing for a long moment. Then he turned his head and looked across the compound. 50 feet away, behind barbed wire, American soldiers were sitting in the dirt. Some were lying down. You could see the bones in their arms from where we stood. Their clothes hung off them like cloth draped over sticks. A few of them were watching the guard barracks. Just watching. No anger on their faces. They were past anger. They were past everything. They were just waiting. I watched Patton's jaw tighten. I had served under him long enough to know what that jaw meant. He turned to Collins. His voice was flat, precise, like the edge of a blade. "What are those men eating?" Collins hesitated. "The POW section, sir. They're on the standard prisoner rations that the Germans had them on. We're working on what are the standard rations?" Another pause. "Soup, sir, mostly water, some vegetables, bread when it was available. The Germans weren't—" "How many calories?" It was not a question. It was a demand. Collins swallowed. 600, sir, perhaps less on some days." 600. Patton said it like he was weighing it, like he was turning the number over in his mind and measuring it against everything he knew about what a man needed to survive. "A grown man needs 2,000 calories to function, Major. A soldier in a field campaign needs more. These men have been getting 600 for months. And those guards," he gestured toward the barracks window without looking at it, his eyes still on the American prisoners, "have been eating like that." He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He walked to the barracks door, opened it, and stepped inside. The guards scrambled to their feet when they saw the 4 stars, plates clattering, chairs scraping. They stood at attention. Patton did not acknowledge the gesture. He walked to the table, looked down at the food. He picked up a fork, pressed it into one of the cuts of meat, watched the juice run. "Good beef," he said quietly. "Where did you get this?" the English-speaking guard translated. They conferred briefly. "German army supply rations, Herr General. It is what we are allocated." "And what are the prisoners allocated?" More conferring. "They are given the prisoner rations. It is a different category." "A different category." Patton set the fork down. "How long have you been feeding them that soup while you ate this?" The guard shifted. "We were following—" "How long?" Silence. "Show me the kitchen." I followed Patton, Collins, and the guard to the prisoner kitchen. It was a small building, poorly equipped. A single stove. A large pot sitting on a cold burner. Patton lifted the lid of the pot. Inside, thin, cloudy water. A few potato peels floating on the surface. Some shreds of turnip. I had eaten that soup for months. I knew exactly what it tasted like. It tasted like nothing. It tasted like the memory of food, like a cruel suggestion that something nourishing had once been nearby. "Each man gets 1 ladle of this per day," the guard confirmed, "and bread twice per week, small portions." Patton replaced the lid. He did not look at the guard again. He walked back outside, into the evening air, and he stood still for a moment. I could see his face clearly. There are those who imagine Patton as a man who operated on rage, a man who shouted and slapped and burned through the world on fury alone. But that is not what I saw in that moment. What I saw was something colder and more deliberate than rage. I saw a man making a decision. "Major Collins." "Sir." "I want every German guard in this camp assembled in the next 10 minutes. In the yard, facing the American section?" "Yes, sir." "I want every American POW who can stand on their feet brought to the fence line." "Yes, sir." "And I want a full inventory of every food supply in those guard barracks. Everything they have stored, everything in that kitchen of theirs, everything." "Yes, sir." Collins was already moving. I stayed close. Within 10 minutes, 23 German guards were standing in a line in the yard. They were unarmed, uncertain, some of them clearly nervous. Across the fence, American prisoners had gathered. Those who could walk had walked to the wire. Those who couldn't were helped by others who were barely strong enough to stand themselves. I stood about 20 feet from Patton as he faced the guards. The evening light was going golden. The air was still. He spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. He did not use a microphone. He did not need one. These men behind this wire are American soldiers. They were captured in combat while fighting for their country. Under the Geneva Convention, a treaty your nation signed, they are entitled to receive the same quality of rations as the soldiers guarding them, the same food, the same treatment. He let that land. You have been feeding them garbage, watery soup, potato peelings, 600 calories, while you ate steak and potatoes and real bread and drank real coffee, while these men were starving, not slowly, not gradually, but dying. You were eating well. Not a single guard moved. Not a sound from the American side of the wire either, except for one man who began to cry very quietly. I heard it. I will never forget it. That ends tonight. Patton turned to Collins. From this moment, the German guards eat what the American prisoners have been eating. The same soup, the same portions. One ladle, once a day. Bread twice a week, nothing more. And the Americans? The Americans eat what the guards have been eating. Every food store those guards have been hoarding goes to my men. The steak, the potatoes, the bread, the coffee, all of it. Tonight. There was a moment of silence. Then, from behind the wire, someone started to clap. A slow, weak clap from hands that barely had the strength to make a sound. Then another, then another, then a sound I will carry with me until I die, the sound of 1,500 starving men applauding. I need to tell you where I was in all of this, not as a witness, as one of the men behind the wire. I had been captured in the Hurtgen forest in November 1944. 5 months. I had come in weighing 172 pounds. By the time Patton walked through that gate, I weighed 108. I had spent 5 months listening to guards eat. You could hear it through the walls at night, the scraping of pans, the smell of cooking drifting across the compound, the sound of men laughing over food while we lay in the dark with our stomachs folded in on themselves. You get to a point where hunger stops being an ache and becomes something else entirely. It becomes a kind of blankness, a fog. You stop thinking about food because thinking about it hurts too much, so you just stop. You lie still. You conserve everything. You wait. I was lying near the fence when Patton arrived. I had been lying there most of the afternoon. I had enough energy to prop myself up on one elbow when the commotion started, when we heard the convoy, when the guards began scrambling. When they made us line up at the fence, a man named Eddie Kowalski helped me to my feet. Eddie had been a linebacker at Notre Dame before the war. By April 1945, he looked like someone had hollowed him out and put his skin back on crooked. But he still had enough strength to put his arm under mine and hold me up. We stood at the wire and we listened to Patton. When he said that the guards would eat what we had been eating and that we would eat what they had been eating, I did not cheer. I did not clap. I just stood there and I felt something happen in my chest, something releasing like a breath I had been holding for 5 months. Someone saw us. Someone finally saw us. The first meal that night was the hardest and the best moment of my life. The medics warned us, bodies that have been starved for months cannot handle rich food suddenly. The stomach shrinks, the system shuts down, eating too much too fast can actually kill a man. They told us to go slowly, small portions, chew carefully. They brought us to the guard barracks storeroom, crates of potatoes, sacks of flour, tinned meat, real meat, not the grey mystery substance we had occasionally seen in our soup, a wheel of hard cheese, jars of preserved vegetables, coffee, real coffee. Some of the men started crying when they saw it. I understood. It was not just food, it was proof. Proof that we had not imagined our own suffering. Proof that while we had been surviving on nothing, there had been plenty 50 feet away. All that time, all those nights, the cooks prepared small portions of everything, mashed potatoes, a bit of meat, bread with butter, real butter. I had not tasted butter in 5 months. I took one bite of the bread with butter, and I had to sit down, not because I was weak, because I was overwhelmed. Eddie Kowalski sat beside me. He was not crying. He was just eating very carefully, very slowly, as if he was afraid the food might disappear if he moved too fast. I watched him take a bite of potato and close his eyes. "How is it?" I asked. He kept his eyes closed. He said, "It tastes like being alive." Across the compound, the German guards were eating their soup, one ladle each. Thin, cloudy water, potato peelings, turnip shreds. I know this because I asked one of the American soldiers monitoring them to tell me what their faces looked like. He said, "They're not talking, they're just staring at the bowls." Good, I thought, good. On the second day, one of the guards asked Major Collins if he could please have more food. He said the portion was not enough. Collins brought the request to Patton. Patton's answer was 4 words. "Tell him I said no." I heard about this and I thought, 4 words and a period. The whole weight of justice in a sentence. On the third day, Patton walked through the American section himself, without ceremony, without an entourage. Just him and Major Collins, moving slowly, stopping to speak to men who were well enough to sit up. He knelt down beside a man named Harold Finch from Memphis, Tennessee, who had been in the camp for almost 2 years. Harold had dysentery and could barely lift his head. Patton said, "Soldier, I'm sorry it took us this long to get here." Harold looked at him. He said, "You're here now, sir." That was all. That was enough. People have been asking me for 50 years what it felt like to watch the guards eat that soup. And I have to be careful how I answer, because I do not want to say the wrong thing. It was not revenge that I felt. Revenge is wanting someone to suffer. That was not what this was. This was something else. This was education. This was the universe correcting an imbalance, making something visible that had been invisible. Those guards had looked at us every day for months and had not seen us. They had seen prisoners, a category, a designation, a different species that required different treatment. They had told themselves it was the system, orders, regulations, categories. Patton made them see us by making them feel what we felt. Not for months, not for years, just for 5 days, long enough to understand. The supplies arrived on day 5. Red Cross shipments, proper rations, medical supplies. The Americans were fed, cared for, prepared for transport home. The German guards were transferred to Allied POW camps, where they would be treated according to the Geneva Convention, fed properly, housed properly. Years later, I read an interview with one of those guards. His name was Klaus Berger. He was 23 years old in 1945. He said, "When General Patton made us eat what they had been eating, I understood for the first time what we had done. Not because someone told me, because I felt it. That is the only way some lessons can be learned." I believe that. I came home to Chicago in July 1945. I weighed 126 pounds. My mother did not recognize me at the train station. She was looking for the man who had left in 1943, and that man was gone. I spent 3 months eating my way back to myself. My mother cooked every meal I had ever loved as a child: pot roast, chicken soup, apple pie, biscuits with honey. She would sit across the table from me and watch me eat, and sometimes her eyes would fill up, and she would look away so I wouldn't see. I always saw. I married a woman named Catherine in 1947. We had 4 children. I became a high school history teacher, which some people found ironic, and I found fitting. I taught the Second World War every year for 31 years. I never told my students that I was in it. I thought it was more important for them to understand the broad picture than to make it about my experience. But I am telling you now, because I am 81 years old, and the men who were there with me are almost all gone, and someone needs to remember. What George Patton understood in that moment, when he stopped at that window, when he smelled that steak, was something simple and profound. He understood that dignity is not a luxury. It is not something you earn or are given on good days. It is the basic ground of what it means to be human. And when you strip it away from another person, when you look at them and decide that they belong to a lesser category, a different type, a group that requires different treatment, you are committing a crime against something fundamental. Not just against them, against yourself, against the possibility of being human together. Patton saw that, and he refused to let it stand for one more hour. He did not give a speech about it. He did not write a memo. He did not convene a committee or wait for official channels. He looked at the situation, understood what justice required, and he acted immediately, without hesitation. That is what leadership looks like when it is real. That is what it looks like when someone in power decides to use that power not for themselves, not for recognition, not for history, but simply because it is right. Eddie Kowalski went home to South Bend, Indiana. He never played football again. His knees had been damaged during captivity and never properly healed. He opened a hardware store and ran it until he was 70. He died in 2001. At his funeral, his daughter read a letter he had written to his children about his time in the war. There was one paragraph about the night of April 29th, 1945, the night the guards ate soup and we ate steak. He wrote, "I have thought about that night thousands of times, not because it was dramatic, not because it was violent, but because it was just. Someone in authority looked at an injustice and fixed it, immediately. No bureaucracy, no delay, no excuse. I spent my whole life trying to be that kind of person. I never quite managed it, but I kept trying." When I heard those words at his funeral, I sat in my pew and I pressed my hands together in my lap and I thought, Eddie, you managed it more than you knew. The camp at Mooseburg was eventually closed, the buildings torn down, a memorial erected, a simple stone marker listing the names of those who died there. It does not mention the 5 days when the guards ate soup, but I remember the smell of that steak through the barracks window, and the way the golden light hit the food on that table, and the way the guards were laughing. I remember the sound of Patton's boots on the dirt as he walked to the door. I remember the clapping, thin and weak and beautiful, rising from behind the wire. I remember the taste of bread with butter, and Eddie Kowalski closing his eyes, and the words he said, "It tastes like being alive." It does. It still does. Every time I sit down to a meal, every Thanksgiving, every Sunday dinner, every ordinary Tuesday morning with coffee and toast, I think of that night. I think of what it cost us to get there. And I think of the man who walked past a window, stopped, and decided that enough was enough. I think of General Patton, and I am grateful. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy powerful wartime stories and untold moments from history, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support allows us to bring these intense, detailed stories to life. Tell us in the comments, if you had been there with Patton that day, would you have followed his order or questioned it? And what do you think you would have done after seeing German guards eating steak while American POWs were starving? See you in the next story.